Last December, I went to Wiesbaden. It was raining when I came out of the station, and dark and freezing cold, and I could see nothing of what was once one of the most fashionable spas in Europe.
The city of Wiesbaden is situated on a spur of the Taunus Mountains. Its position is delightful. In the midst of gardens and orchards, surrounded by handsome villas and ornamented promenades. Its waters, which are alkaline and of high temperature, are considered most efficacious in cases of gout and rheumatism. The principal spring issues at 155 degrees Fahrenheit and has a taste of bad soup. But when it is cool, one becomes rather fond of it. The patient should not object to the scum on the water. That is a sign of freshness. While the visitor is walking about to cool his potion in the vicinity of the Trinkhalle, a band discourses most excellent music.
Next morning, the sun was shining. I walked up the main avenue past pump rooms and assembly places, and then climbed a hill to a wintry, late 19th century suburb with magnificent villas on every side and views southwards towards the River Rhine. Near the top of the hill, on a winding back street, and just opposite an abandoned 18th century Jewish cemetery, I found what I was looking for.
20th of May, 1883. Greetings, dear friend, from Wiesbaden, where I have discovered a quite unbelievably pretty place to stay. Come and see it. It will make you envious, but come all the same. It was built as an artist studio, but it's now the prettiest country home with a wonderfully high, cool, airy room. Here I can live and work most charmingly, almost as if I wanted to copy Wagner. Dear lady, in about a week, I'll send you in the usual arrangement for 2 pianos my modest little F major symphony, which I wrote this summer in Wiesbaden. The fearsome reputation this composition has already acquired makes me want to cancel all my engagements. But you will master it in no time.
My dear Johannes, I don't know where this letter will find you, but I write it once because my heart is full. I have spent such joyous hours with your wonderful creation, which I have played through several times with Elisa. What a work! What poetry! What a harmonious mood pervades the whole. Every movement made as if from a single casting, one beat of the heart, and each a jewel. From start to finish, one is enveloped by this music in the mysterious magic of forest life. I cannot tell which of the four movements I love the most, but in the first, I am charmed immediately by the gleam of dawning day and rays of sun shining through the trees. Ah, in this music, everything springs to life. Everything breathes cheerfulness. It is exquisite.
Rays of the sun, gleams of dawning day, woods, forests, trees, breathing cheerfulness. How can music possibly reproduce such non-musical impressions? Now, a true composer, a composer of instrumental music, would never dream of attempting such a thing. Were he to do so, he would immediately find himself not inside music, but outside it, like Berlioz or Liszt. No, music can only be musical, made of sounds, artistically combined. And the only thing that can give us insight into what it is and what makes it beautiful is seeing exactly how the creative act takes place inside the mind of a great composer. A musical idea originates in the composer's imagination. And in his mind, the composer develops this idea. Crystals coalesce around it until by imperceptible degrees, the entire structure appears before him with this harmony, this rhythm, and this particular instrumental color. Now, once this idea has taken root in the composer's imagination, it begins to grow and develop like a tree. And the idea is now the center around which branches group themselves in every conceivable way, and always unmistakably related to the original idea.
For example, back to front and change from minor to major. Or upside down and back to front. Or no longer back to front, but still upside down.
And out of such ingenious manipulations, in the mind of the composer there comes a melody filled with life, pulse, strength, and vitality.
When I read your words, I smiled and thought to myself, he applies his theories so timidly. Let me say something to you, just quickly and briefly. When I invent melodies, almost the only thing that actually has meaning for me is the bass. To me, the bass is sacred. It is the firm footing on which I build my stories.
Music certainly consists of sounds, but not only of sounds, it also consists of movement. To understand this, imagine An arabesque, a mere ornament, a shape. Now imagine that same arabesque, not still and motionless, but rising before our eyes in constantly changing forms, climbing from gentle opening curves to lofty heights, then falling back again. Now that arabesque has become noble and exalted. Consider it another way. You will recall how, in childhood, all of us were once delighted with the changing tints and forms of a kaleidoscope. Music is a kind of kaleidoscope. It too brings forth a profusion of beautiful tints and forms, now sharply contrasted, now almost imperceptibly graduated. And every new tint and form is logically connected with all the others. And though each might be entirely novel in its individual effect, together they form a complete and self-sufficient whole.
I was born and raised in Vienna, and I have been a Brahmsian since my youth. And I remember how, when this great composer was alive, it was customary for certain types of people to speak of him with oily bombast, moist flattery, and honeyed impertinence as a classic, an academic. Brahms was a progressive, a great and mighty innovator in the realm of musical language.
An innovator, a progressive, with this primitive accompaniment like a hurdy-gurdy or a barrel organ? And a melody so simple sounding it might almost be a nursery song.
But Brahms did not write childish trash. He knew adults cannot talk in Mother Goose fashion, that an alert and well-trained mind will not put up with baby talk. Great art presupposes a listener who is educated and trained to notice brevity, concision, and elaboration. A listener who understands that what really happens in music is nothing but the endless remolding of a simple, basic shape. And that no idea in music should appear that does not develop, modify, intensify, and clarify. And by doing so, throw light and color on the entire work. In Brahms's melodies, we can hear his lifelong drive to liberation, to freedom from all musical restriction and convention.
And not only in his melodies, consider that barrel organ drone, that hurdy-gurdy. It's in A, quite a distant and remote key from the home key of F. And later, this same music comes back in D, another distant key. And as Brahms constantly changes his melodies and his keys, so he also changes his orchestration. Strings and a single flute, but when that music returns, he adds a new color, horns. And the melody, which first was for just one clarinet and one bassoon, now comes back with two of each, a different sound to make us listen in a different way. Brahms weaves in little fragments of other voices, like the oboe.
This is the art of developing variation. And in music, all development and all variation takes place through a shifting and a reordering of the various components of the original idea. We know Brahms cherished his musical ideas. Indeed, he called them gifts of grace. And he worked them out most carefully. He was a craftsman, and a good craftsman likes to be conscious of what he produces. He is proud of his hands, of the flexibility of his mind, of his sense of balance, his never-failing logic, his multitudes of variations. And most of all, his ability to penetrate to the remotest consequences of his idea.
A symphony in F, with a second theme in A, and then in D. Something is missing from this music in F major. And what is missing is what we would normally expect, the dominant. Throughout this opening movement, Brahms seems deliberately to be avoiding this most obvious chord, C major. And by doing so, he creates a vacuum, an empty space, something our ears begin to long for.
What a work! What poetry! What a harmonious mood pervades the whole. Every movement made as if from a single casting, one beat of the heart. and each a jewel. And this second movement, the purest idol, I seem to overhear worshippers at a little forest shrine, and a babbling brook, and beetles and mosquitoes playing, and such a swarming and whispering all around, we feel ourselves spun into a web of all the joys of nature.
Clara Schumann was a great musician, and however fanciful her words, she knew what she was talking about. Eingesponnen, spun into a web. Espressivo semplice. But pick apart the web of this simple and expressive melody, and we find a thread we recognize from the previous movement. Take the end of this same melody, this long web of notes with its church harmonies and its wind instruments suggesting an organ.
I seem to overhear worshippers at a little forest shrine.
What a scoundrel this man Brahms is. What an ungifted swine. There's so little natural inventiveness in his melodies.
We would do ourselves a good deal more honor by appreciating that, in fact, he is a giant, lofty, and unapproachable.
But he refuses to satisfy the needs of straightforward musical feeling. He is afraid to speak in a normal musical language that reaches to the heart.
To my mind, he is the only truly classical composer of the present day. I make no prophecy, but I feel that the power of such a great composer comes down among all of us who are musicians.
Remember that theme from the first movement? Change it from major to minor, and it reinvents itself. In In its new form, this melody would still have sat quite comfortably on the original hurdy-gurdy barrel organ drone.
But that would have been to create trash. A composer of serious music cannot repeat 3 to 7 times what is comprehensible at once. No, a great musician writes for minds of the upper classes. And that is why he lends to every note full pregnancy of meaning. Harmonies such as these compete successfully with many a Wagnerian passage. And I well remember how, when this symphony was new, to the ears of those times, such richness seemed a daring enterprise. The most important capacity of a composer is to know from the beginning how to cast a glance into the remotest future of all his themes and motives, to know beforehand every consequence existing in his material. And whether he does this consciously or unconsciously is of no importance. It suffices that the music proves it.
It was such a glorious day when he arrived to stay with us. And as we drove to meet Father, the valley of the Rhine sparkled and shimmered in the distance. Brahms was so taken with the beauty of the evening that he told me he would like to find somewhere to live, so he could spend the whole summer here in Wiesbaden. Next morning, we went to look at a studio recommended by our agent. It was in a house built by the famous painter Knaus, which now belonged to an old lady who rented out extra rooms to spa visitors in summer. The accommodation consisted of the studio, with 5 or 6 other rooms, and all surrounded by a garden with old trees, and far enough from neighboring houses that Brahms's piano playing wouldn't disturb anyone. Through the large windows, there was a wonderful view of the whole of Wiesbaden, and beyond it, the river Rhine, glinting like a silver snake in the sunshine.
My friend, do write and tell me what you're up to on the Rhine. Remember, you're not Wagner, and you're certainly not the composer of that song.
So, what really drew Brahms to this mighty river in the summer of 1883? Certainly not that song, and probably not Wagner. His friends thought it might have been a woman, a young singer, Hermine Spies. She lived in Wiesbaden, and Brahms was certainly fond of her. But this third symphony suggests he really had another connection in his mind. More than 30 years before, in 1850, Brahms's champion and mentor Robert Schumann had composed his own Third Symphony, and he called it the Rhenish Symphony, a symphony about the Rhine. Not so long after that Rhenish Symphony was composed came the moment famous in the history of music when Schumann and his wife Clara discovered the 20-year-old Brahms.
After years of waiting, he is come, a new force in music.
One sent straight from God. It is overwhelming to see him at the piano, his face transfigured, his beautiful hands.
Revealing regions, magical spheres, streams from every source, united by his genius as one roaring current, one torrent down-rushing to the waterfall.
Should you think that the close resemblance between these two great symphonic openings, written more than 30 years apart, might be a mere accident, a coincidence, then just listen to this, one tiny fleeting moment from the middle of Schumann's Rhenish Symphony.
Revered Master, you have brought me so much happiness I cannot even try to thank you. God grant my music will give evidence of how you and your music have inspired me.
A few months after their first meeting, in February 1854, Robert Schumann attempted suicide by throwing himself into the River Rhine. 30 years later, almost to the day.
February the 11th, 1884. My dear Johannes, I don't know where this letter will find you, but I write it once, because my heart is full. What a work! What poetry! I cannot tell which of the four movements I love the most, but this third one seems to me a pearl, a gray pearl, dipped in a tear of woe.
A grey pearl, dipped in a tear of woe. What did Clara Schumann mean by that? What is it that creates that greyness? Well, for one thing, a certain strangeness and ambiguity in the rhythm. If you had to sing that melody back after hearing it just once, you might find yourself unintentionally simplifying it like this. In fact, so famous has this melody become that there's grown up whole traditions of simplifying it and changing it.
It's our latest record called Take My Love. Take my love, hold me tight. Take my love, share this night. Share my lips, share my heart.
But none of that is exactly what Brahms wrote. What he does is take a tiny rhythm and delay it, shifting it from a weak beat to a strong beat. And by doing this, he suggests another kind of grayness, another level of rhythmic ambiguity, the simultaneous presence of two different pulses. A slow waltz rhythm, and another waltz rhythm twice as slow, like a ghostly dream. And it's not only the rhythm that suggests the grayness of this pearl. The elaborate accompaniment underneath the melody is also filled with ambiguity. Inside that shimmering spider's web of sound, there are two quite different ideas, each flowing at a different speed. Grayness and ambiguity of melody, pulse, accompaniment, and orchestration. We hardly notice, but every time the tune comes back, the colors change. And hidden deep inside this densely woven web of melody and accompaniment, eingesponnen, as Clara Schumann called it, there's yet another familiar connecting thread. The hurdy-gurdy tune from the first movement, trim a couple of notes from the beginning and the end. And slow it down.
I utterly dispute these themes are meant to have anything whatsoever in common with one another. And if they do, I don't want praise for it, but admit that when I work, my ideas just don't fly far enough. So, completely unintentionally, I keep returning to the same thing. It's just playing around. Or what's far worse, ingenious playing around. I have a horror of that. My friend, instead of spending your time reading, you really should try seriously to take your ideas for a stroll.
Brahms, taking his ideas for a stroll and swinging them almost lopsidedly across the beat. Listen to the woodwind, and this time with double basses to mark the beat, the beginning of every measure. And now the cello's also swinging across the beat, but in a different way.
I cannot tell which of the 4 movements I love the most, but this third one seems to me a pearl. A gray pearl dipped in a tear of woe. And at the end, the modulation is quite wonderful.
My dear fellow, recently I had the good fortune to spend several days in Vienna with Dr. Brahms, who was just back from Wiesbaden. I have never seen him so cheerful. We met every day and we talked about everything. And when I asked him if I could hear something of his new symphony, he immediately sat down at the piano and played the first movement for me, and then the last. I tell you without exaggeration, this one is greater even than his first 2 symphonies. If not perhaps in grandeur and in power, then certainly in beauty.
The finale in particular is strikingly dramatic and terse. The listener must be prepared for short themes, violent changes of mood, romantic depth and power, and an opening which is dark and quiet. But the counterstatement which immediately follows sheds the weirdest light on this melody by taking individual notes and prolonging them. And then the key changes, and we discover an exceedingly solemn theme of the strangest rhythmic character, with trombones and contrafagotto. It is to no less a person than Sir Edward Elgar that I owe the remark that this theme
is the tragic outcome of that wistful melody we first heard in the middle of the slow movement.
The last movement of your symphony has had a most powerful effect on me. I find it equally deep and original. And strangely, though like you I usually have no love of literary fantasies about music, I cannot free myself from one particular poetic image, Hero and Leander. As soon as I hear the broad C major theme, that brave, bold swimmer comes to me unbidden, his breast riding the waves, his mighty passion in view, his strong, heroic strokes to the goal, in spite of the elements which pound him.
What a work! What poetry! And what a harmonious mood pervades the whole. Every movement made as if from a single casting. One beat of the heart. And each a jewel.
When I read your words, I smiled. For in truth, when I invent melodies, almost the only thing that actually has meaning for me is the bass. The bass, to me, is sacred. It is the strong footing on which I build my stories. Only on top of a given bass can I truly invent the new, truly invent new melodies, truly create.
Glorious is this music with its passionate upward surge. But the excited heart is soon calmed down again for the final transfiguration, which begins with such beauty, I can find no words to describe it.
There is certainly a mood in his music one does not often hear in Brahms. So full of love, it makes one's heart melt. And what magnificent melodies.
Long ago, when Brahms was only 20, he took it into his head to spend an entire summer wandering down the magnificent valley of the Rhine with nothing but a pack on his back and a knobbled stick in his fist. I can imagine him passing many a warm, sunlit night, dreaming rather than sleeping in the shade of an old linden tree.
I abhor useless scenes evoked by someone else's imagination.
And for the rest of his life, Brahms needed only to follow the snaky course of our immortal German Rhine to find himself traveling into the romantic land of his youth, where, from mountains and castles, fields and woods, clefts and crevices, he could hear resounding all around that enticing and magical greeting, that old emblem of longing, the leitmotif of his art.
My friend, instead of reading, you really should try seriously to take your ideas for a stroll. My beloved Clara, you know that holidays and vacations I like to spend alone, quietly, and with just a few dear ones up in my room, my piano and my books and scores. But of course, like anyone else, I'm still dependent on the world outside, the turmoil in which we all live. I don't laugh at it, I don't join in the lies, but I do feel as if the best part of oneself one could lock up, leaving merely half the person, walking away as in a dream.